Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together. Well, hey, community groups, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Hope you're doing well. This past Sunday, we launched into our new prayer series, 6-week series, and we were both preaching this weekend.
It was fun to do it together.
Yeah, how many did you do? How many sermons?
Yeah, four.
Four sermons? Okay.
You were at Town Center.
Town Center did the one, so you had the heavy lifting. But this week, what was our topic, Sam?
Yeah, we talked about, we opened up the series, what is prayer? Why does it matter? Why are we doing this whole thing and emphasizing this for 6 weeks? And we really leaned into listening to God and learning to hear his voice. What does his voice sound like? And where can we encounter that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a great series to be heading into, as I think, as Christians, we can struggle like so much with prayer, right? Like I think it can be especially like a place of shame, a place of maybe wondering how to even start. But Jesus teaches his disciples how to pray. They ask him, teach us to pray. And so obviously it's important.
Yeah.
But, why do you think we don't pray? Because I think there's a reluctance or a hesitancy sometimes.
I think one of them you named is we don't know what to do. So it's easier just to avoid it. We sit down and we're like, I'm here, I'm going to pray. And what do I do? How do I start? I think busyness is another thing. So easy to get busy doing activity, even activity for God, but not create space to actually sit and listen or pray and bring our needs to him. So I think that's another one. Distraction, at least in my life, is a huge one. There's always something fighting for our attention. And prayer, the need for prayer is never shouting at us like a kid who needs to be fed, or even like social media will do, or other responsibilities. And so easy to neglect because there's all of these other things that are fighting for our attention. What do you think? What else could be?
Yeah, I think like apathy too. Like, do we approach prayer with joy, or just sort of like this is just sort of something I'm supposed to do? And maybe that's because like we don't really know personally the God who we're talking to, right? That we have like this joy and this delight to meet with him. And so I think like part of it is just, we need to learn like who God is more and grow in intimacy with him. And I think prayer becomes easier when we know the love that he has for us, the joy in his presence. And just even like, maybe we're disappointed, unanswered prayer. That's like one of the things we're going to be talking about this series later on. But do we believe that God hears us or will respond to us? And so I wonder if maybe disappointment gets in the way.
Does it actually make a difference?
Exactly. Yeah, maybe having like a wrong view of God, right? Does prayer actually do anything? But obviously we're not the experts at prayer. Like we're very much on the journey with you.
Pilgrims along the way, for sure.
Like Sam, I'm interested to know, like just maybe tell us a bit about like the highs and lows of your prayer journey to this point in your life.
Yeah, well, prayer has taken on different roles in my life through different seasons, right? And there's been certain moments. Like I found early in my relationship with Jesus, I would be really excited because I would be praying and I would be seeing answered prayer happen all the time. I'd pray for a parking spot and I'd get a parking spot in it. And I think that's actually probably the case for a lot of people. Is that early on, and I think that's God just being so gracious to us. And that we're learning about him and about prayer and that he loves us. And so as we ask for these little things, he just grants us, favor in those ways. And so some of the questions that I hear from people sometimes is, it's not like it once was. Like I struggle now to hear God's voice, and I miss those times. Am I doing something wrong, or, that sort of thing? And I think the answer is not necessarily. Sometimes I think it's us actually growing in our faith, and God, maybe not. He doesn't want to be a genie in a bottle.
Totally.
That we just come to when we need our vending machine or those sorts of things. And there's a relationship building that happens over time. And so that was my journey of growing and learning to hear God's voice. There were seasons where God seemed silent or quiet. And so this last season, I've been specifically just trying to build in rhythms into my day, not just waiting for prayer to happen accidentally in my day, but building in rhythms. So I get up earlier than the rest of my family and just try to sit in silence and listen for him. Sometimes God speaks through a sense or a thought or through scripture. And sometimes we're just sitting together in silence. And I'm learning to really love that. Just
being with him.
just being with God. Or even more recently, I've been using an app called Lectio 365.
Yeah, Pete Gregg.
Yeah, exactly. Which I've found really helpful. So if you want to download the app, Lectio 365, it's called, and it's really just guided prayer times. So where that's been helpful for me is some mornings when I wake up and I don't feel like I'm sleepy, right? I can just put the headphones in and take the dog for a walk and be led through a guided prayer time, a reflection through scripture, even just breathing and slowing myself down, growing in awareness of God. So that's been really helpful for me as well. And so what about you?
Yeah. I think like prayer hasn't been like a smooth journey for me.
Yeah.
You know, I think like earlier, like maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, when I was really beginning to take my faith seriously, I really dove into scripture, but my prayer life wasn't as active. But I think just learning that like prayer is a place of like encounter. Like it's not just a place where we ask God for things, but we can experience God like through prayer. We can hear his voice. I think it's really been in the last few years that I've incorporated a lot more prayer into my life. And so I think what I try to do on a somewhat regular basis is, you know, get up early, kind of like you're saying, spend time in the Word first, seeking God there. And then I'll try to do like prayer walks around my house.
Oh, I like that.
Or around my neighborhood, not around my house.
I was going to say up the stairs, down to the basement.
Yeah. But just, you know, half hour getting fresh air and just, you know, praying through my requests for the week or the day, seeking to like hear if God is saying anything, interceding for like the city, the church, that kind of thing. And so I think that's kind of been like my routine, but consistency I've found to be one of the hardest things.
It's so hard.
It's like,
totally.
how do you do it?
And even more recently
All the time.
in our marriage, you know, I'm almost embarrassed to say that we haven't consistently prayed together every day. But more recently, Jordy and I have made the commitment, let's finish every day before we go to sleep, just praying together. And just that really simple rhythm, rather than trying to get crazy with it. I'm going to do 2 hours of prayer a day. And I do hope that someday I get to that place.
Right.
That'd be wonderful. But right now, it's carving out space early in the morning, trying to do a little bit of fixed hour prayer, which we might talk about later in the series, but just certain moments throughout the day, quoting whether it be Our Father or different just recentering moments, praying with my wife before sleep. Like there's just these different moments of carving out rhythms to hear God's voice.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things we kind of talked through a bit on the weekend was like, how do we hear God's voice? How does he speak?
Yeah.
And so what were like a couple of things that you mentioned?
I mean, we talked about, I think we both talked about Jesus is the primary, the Word. And we spent the whole Advent series looking at the Word became flesh. And so in Jesus, we see God, we experience God. Also the Word being Scripture. It's a great starting place. And God is never going to speak and contradict what he said in Scripture. And so whenever we hear God speak in any form, we want to weigh it against Scripture. God speaks loudly through Scripture and has all throughout the ages. And I mentioned the Lectio 365 app. There's a practice that we talk about in the prayer guide as well called Lectio Divina.
Yeah.
And that's a way to really slow down and let Scripture speak, God speak to you through Scripture. What are some of the other ones?
Yeah, one of them I think is pain, right? It's like I think we live in a culture that like really doesn't like pain. And I mean, I get it, right? Pain is hard, but it's not meaningless. Like God speaks through it. He can teach us something in the midst
For
of
whatever
it.
reason, we seem to be so much more sensitive to his voice. At least I found myself in the midst of sorrow or hardship or pain.
Yeah, there's that C.S. Lewis quote, like, you know, pain is God's megaphone. So I think that's one of the ways that he can speak. Creation, I think, is another, right? Like creation reveals God's glory, reveals like what he's like. Community as well, right?
Yeah.
Like God has given us the gift of the church, his people. And if we're filled with the Spirit, like he can use us to be of encouragement to others.
And to discern his voice in community,
Absolutely.
right? Hey, this is what I sense the Lord is calling me to or is saying, and so to weigh that against each other. Prophecy in community would be another one of maybe God giving you a word or a picture that confirms something in my heart or encourages me and absolutely speaks through community.
And so I think like when we think that we're always going to get the audible voice, like I think that's like a really high expectation.
And maybe
like, I've
that's
never gotten it.
Me
like,
neither.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a disservice that we as pastors have done too when we say kind of broad brush strokes, like God told me,
Right.
or I heard God say. I think people could assume that we're talking about God saying, Ryan, dude, and as you said, that hasn't been the case for you. But it doesn't mean we don't hear God's voice, but it's
Totally.
often more a still small voice,
Absolutely.
right, as Scripture talks about. Or it's a sense, or it's a thought that pops into your head. You're like, that's not how I normally think, and it sounds a lot like the Jesus I read about in Scripture, or these sorts of things. And so our hope and our prayer with this series is not just that you would learn more about prayer and fill your mind with more knowledge about prayer. You will learn more about prayer, hopefully, if we do our jobs well through the series. But our hope is that as a church, we would be a praying church.
Amen.
That we would grow our prayer lives both personally and corporately. And so as you start your discussions now and walk through even some of the questions we asked each other, you can follow along with the discussion guide. We hope that you would get vulnerable and honest, and ultimately that this would spur us on, these conversations, to grow in intimacy with God. There's a great quote from a guy named Ronald Rolheiser. He says, there's no bad way to pray, and there's no single starting point for prayer. The spiritual masters offer one non-negotiable rule. You have to show up for prayer and show up regularly. Everything else is negotiable and respects the unique circumstances of the person. And so we just go to prayer, and we create the space and allow God to speak.
So good. Well, thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Ryan.
One more thing to bring to your attention. If you haven't already checked out the prayer guide that follows along with this series, it's available on our website as a downloadable PDF. And this is really meant to help you grow in your prayer life.
Yeah.
So we hope it blesses you.
Really great resource.
We hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media, where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.